Marshall Field famously said, "Give the lady what she wants." And famous architect, Chicago architect Daniel Burnham said, "Make no small plans." Both these men's legacies live on at Macy's on State. Welcome to this special tour of State Street. I'm Stanley Smith. Meet me under the clock is another famous Chicago saying. And that's what I was doing recently in downtown Chicago. As I snapped these pictures, I heard people hurrying across the street and snapping pictures and saying, "Oh, yes, this is the Marshall Field store, now Macy's." Seems to be a common refrain, but most important thing, people are still rushing in. As you enter the site, you'll notice the name plaques, the namesake name plaques, which have recently been restored. Many people didn't notice, but they have. They've been remarkably refurbished. Previously, they were pretty weather worn and oxidized, but they've been actually lovingly restored. On the Randolph Street side, we have the tradition of fine window displays continuing with some spring color. This is the State Street facade of the building, rebranded as Macy's, but pretty much looking as it always has. As you walk inside the store, you're still taking the footsteps on some of the original marble tile. This is actually from an 80s, maybe no 70s renovation. The original Daniel Burnham tile was marble was taken out some time ago, and this was from the 70s and 80s. And on the first floor, a lot of white gleaming tile has replaced some of this, but lots of big patches of the what we're familiar with at the State Street store. In the North State Street room, you walk in, and again, pretty much as it would seem to anyone from the past, the white Corinthian columns looking up into the atrium. And then we see glimpses of a 90s refurbish when some of the capitals on the columns were gilded and the atrium was opened up. A lot of the fencing and walled in sections of the atrium were opened up in that renovation. That continues to be a lovely and inviting space. The State Street, North State Street room was in later history was always the cosmetic room. Now it's been repurposed as handbags. It was somewhat reconfigured in the 90s renovation when part of the room was cut off to create a loading dock. And a lot of the ledge atrium center islands that traditionally had been the base for large visual spectacular displays in the atriums has been somewhat replaced with vendor branding and these pods, which they've kind of gotten around by creating this big platform in the middle of the room to create a spectacular display, which kind of impedes in the sight lines as you walk in, but as you traverse the space of the atrium going up, it does provide a nice splash of color in the space. This, of course, is the North State room looking up toward the skylight, and you can see all the balconies and balustrades and capitals. This is looking down into the light well into the North State room. You can see all the various floors of retailing space. As we enter into the South State Street. It's been a long time since I toured Macy's or worked there. I worked there in the late 1980s, and the building was basically divided up into 6 different quadrants. This would be the South State Street room. And at the day that I was visiting recently, they were having an impromptu fashion show with young models modeling gowns. I guess possibly could be prom. And it was a small crowd of people gathered to watch this informal fashion show, and they were snapping pictures here in the South State Street room. And again, this is some of the original tile, what we would perceive as more traditional part of the store. And this room is dominated by the Tiffany Dome, beautiful glass mosaic dome hovering over this space. Another beautiful view. It's got 2 of the original 3 Tiffany chandeliers. I remember in my time in the late 80s, the third one kind of rotated around the store in various different departments as a display prop that they'd install and then disassemble and put somewhere else. And I like to think it's somewhere, but I haven't seen it anywhere in the store for a long time. As you go up the stairs from the South State Street room, this is one of the, I think it's actually the only remaining of what I believe was originally five sets of staircases going through the building. This one is of particular interest to me in the South State Street room because this is actually the balcony, it uses a balcony by Philip Miller when he announced the renovation of the store. And again, I've not done extensive research on this. This is just a recollection from my own past. But so I remember that at the time, the goal was to take the store roughly from $150 million annual sales to $250 million by renovating it and reconfiguring it to make it even more attractive and more productive. This is a view from that balcony looking into the South State Street room, and you get a close up of some of these Corinthian capitals in the room. Pretty much looking as it did in my time. It was more of a creamy, slightly creamy white, but would have been perceived as white. It is actually kind of a startling white now. In the 90s renovation, these were gilded gold with some teal and brown accenting, but it's probably preferable back to what is more of its original look. And then in the course of time, and some of the rooms were reconfigured, I did note that as much as we think things can't be reproduced or they can't craft things like this like they used to, they did in fact, because I've seen a couple of these capitals reproduced when they've taken out various escalators and elevator banks over time. Also on the first floor, this is the South Wabash room. So Wabash and Washington. And this is fine jewelry, which in my time, I think it was fine jewelry, a lovely room with different pods and different boutiques. Angela Cumming was just to the right here. And it was always been a lovely room. And it's essentially unchanged. These very plain columns. This, of course, is the oldest part of the store, I think from the late 1890s. And it's very plain, but it's always had these lovely chandeliers that has this kind of quiet elegance to it. I remember we used to have silver over here, and there was always a lady in the back room. You could see her sitting there polishing silver all day. That seemed to be her job. And I ran into her once on the train. She was heading to Evanston because they had a special collection of books on silver, and that was her job all day, was polishing silver. And she'd like to have a little knowledge of what she was handling. Also in the South Wabash room, this is a jewelry section with a line branded R.H. Macy and Company, which was kind of intriguing to me. And again, you have a close-up of the chandeliers. Another view of the South Wabash room with, interesting pairing. It's a traditional space, but they have a mix of different modern props and mixing of elements, past and present, and also beautiful illumination. They've done a nice job illuminating the spaces throughout the store. And this picture I snapped just real quick because it has one of, I think, about 5 or 6 panels of Art Deco glass. This is one section. It really should be all together 6. They are scattered around this room. I remember these from the Water Tower store that were in the fine jewelry department there. And when they closed the Water Tower store, they brought these panels to this location. And this is a snapshot of a drinking fountain that's just outside the fine jewelry department as you pass through. It's out of commission, but they have a plaque which identifies it as part of the history of the Marshall Field and Company iteration of the store. And then this is the Mid-Wabash room on the first floor, which had been men's department for quite some time. Of course, people who go way back would remember that the men's store was traditionally across the street in a separate building, the men's store on Washington and Wabash, famous for, I think it was the 6th or 7th floor grill. When I was a kid, I remember my father taking me there and being scared by the grizzly bear, taxidermy stuffed grizzly bear they had. I think they deny that ever existed, but I do know some people who remember the bear. This is a fountain that they relocated from the center atrium when they disassembled the 90s renovation and reconfigured it here. At that time, this fountain was touted as being a rediscovery of some element of the store's past. I never was able to track that down, but for whatever reason, it's here, and it seems to be a nice gathering point for people in the middle of the men's department. This is kind of a fun visual element. They created something out of nothing, the Marshall Field clock. And against this background, this color changes seasonally to kind of create a backdrop for whatever visual theme they have going on in the store. And in the North Wabash room, they've created a Frango boutique of chocolates, the Frango Mint chocolate, which many people are familiar with and associate with the Marshall Field and Company. But in fact, it's actually associated and began with the Frederick and Nelson Company, I believe in Seattle. When Marshall Field and Company bought Frederick and Nelson's, they acquired that Franco chocolates. And then in the, oh, you're going to get me on the history lesson here. First or Second World War. Must have been the First World War. Whenever Ferdinand Franco was causing problems on the world stage, they rebranded the Franco Mint into the Frango Mint. And I thought this is quite nice. They've done a nice job with bringing in the green, the darker version of this Marshall Field green, and really making a nice statement. They have other Frango branding throughout the building. These dress forms I've seen in the building for quite some time. They remind me of the Tiffany chandelier that's missing in the South State Street room. We've got some archive photos of people from the Frango kitchen. I do remember the Frango kitchen when they were still making Frangos and on State Street. I think it was between the 13th and the 12th floor. Visual display department was on 13, and we used to take the stairs down to 12 to the employee cafeteria, and we used to walk past the Frango kitchen. It always smelled pretty good. I remember once walking by a chocolate covered shovel they must have been using to, I mean, it's impromptu stirring of a vat of chocolate. And I also remember the stairs sometimes being somewhat coated by people's feet going up and down the stairs with chocolate. Some of the stuff you just can't make up. Also, Marshall Field branded products. They've got tote bags and gifts and ornaments, and we're seeing more of that at State Street. I think they're featuring that because they've recognized that there is a steady draw and a brand recognition of the name, and tourists and local people like to buy these as gifts and keepsake remembrances. Um, the real reason for this video is really just what a true delight it was and is to visit the Macy store this spring. They've really transformed the store with this fun theme of kind of a surreal garden show. They don't currently have a garden show. Marshall Field never had a garden show. When the store was acquired by Dayton Hudson, Dayton Hudson actually is the company that introduced the idea of the flower show. And I do remember it being very, very elaborate with the entire State Street first floor completely banked with live flowers and tulips and azaleas and rhododendrons, and all of the State Street windows. It looked like the Botanic Gardens came in and just banked it wall to wall with beautiful spring flowers and gravel and ponds and fountains. Truly stunning. And even the main aisle was arced with plants and trees and shrubs, flowering shrubs of all kind. Um, this is actually an entirely new, modern uh, display, visual. You could take it as a nod to the garden show or not, but either way, it's truly a delight. In this scene, we see how light and bright, how immaculately clean the building is. When I worked at Marshall Field, I mean, it had some real rough spots. We had a tremendous visual team that was working constantly to create a dynamic and traditional and somewhat luxurious experience for shoppers. But if you look closely, it was a little rough around the edges. But I would say currently the store is immaculate and gleaming, and probably a better shopping experience than it actually has ever been. This is a shot of the display on the first floor with the flower and surreal landscape scene. This is another Passover in between the State Street and Wabash side of the store, uh, featuring spring displays and spring fashion. Women's wear, they've done a nice job really bringing together really nice looks, and every one of these pods has rack of clothes, which you don't have to go searching for it. It's all pulled together for you in a very convenient and appealing way. Men's department as well on the Wabash side. More men's, lots of stuff going on in the men's department. This I thought was particularly charming on the men's floor, on the second floor, looking into the North State Street room with, I mean, it doesn't get much more traditional or familiar to us. With those of us who are familiar with the Marshall Field store, I mean, you'd feel right at home. Again, men's department, they haven't finished here. They were still working when I toured the store. They're getting ready for a big corporate visit. I believe all the Macy's officials will be in the store on Wednesday, and they are literally putting the finishing touches on this store. I was noticing more brands. For some reason, I don't know why. I think a lot of us have a down market view or vision of Macy's in general, but I did a tour of Federated's Bloomingdale store, the Nordstrom store, and even Marcus's Spring and Macy's on State. And I did think that Macy's was looking pretty on par as far as featuring um, brands, a good breadth and width of brands. Here's the Calvin Klein boutique in the men's department. And something for everybody. Give the lady what she wants, but also have something for everybody. I don't know if most men will be wearing a lavender or pink suit, but it was good enough for the Great Gatsby. And again, I think this is a smart merchandising move. It might not be for everybody, but it gets your attention and it gives you the impression that the store is fashion forward and has something for everyone and some variety. And if you're so inclined, maybe you wouldn't want to wear a whole suit of this, but maybe a jacket or maybe the pants mixed with a blue blazer. I have my fashion stylist friend Marcy, and she'd be happy to help walk you through this. Ralph Lauren, again, strong brand recognition. And this Ralph Lauren shop is one of the fine anchors of the men's department on the second floor. Very traditional look into this room. And then the more casual, more fashion forward colors in the next room. Also Ralph Lauren in women's. I believe this was on the third floor. Again, lovely. This looks like a textbook showroom example of really merchandising at its best. Lovely, a lovely display, lovely presentation, and very appealing. Fashion looks pretty good. This blush and pink is very popular this season. We don't personally follow trends, but they are on trend for anyone who's looking. Calvin Klein women's, again, different palette, but very nice looking boutique, very well put together, and nice breadth of depth of stock as well. Another version of a women's department, nice grouping of fashion and color pull through. The store was very colorful. I thought at Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom's a little dry, like a little too safe. Um, maybe, well, I wouldn't call these colors flashy, but maybe people think that's not sophisticated, but it was very appealing and it made for a lovely, really encouraging experience. It made me feel happy just being in the store. Um, I guess if you put enough flowers in people's faces. I'm also not a big fan of light boxes, but I will say this was a pretty good foil to the store. It's a big space. It's a big store. It has high ceilings and it is somewhat antiquated, even though it's been lovingly maintained. The light boxes really did the trick because as you walk through the store, it really pulled it together because you did notice the color and the light across the floor, across the atriums. It really pulled it together. I do like the cloud theme. I believe it was the late 80s. They store, maybe it was maybe mid 80s. I do remember a couple different times they did the clouds, uh, kind of somewhat Magritte like, big banners and big bolts of fabric draped all over the building, up and down the atrium, walls covered in clouds. Of course, they were not illuminated, but it was a pretty nice complement to the architecture of the place. Again, just showing how I think the store is really well merchandised. This is a great color theme. They've got a lot of variety here, dresses. There really wasn't anything that wasn't appealing about most of the fashion in the store. It was, I think, something for everyone in this season. This is again another example. I mean, very colorful. You don't have to wonder where the merchandise is. It's on display. It's right next to it. Lots of different options. And I mean, even if this is not your style, it definitely has curb appeal. This is another example of just a general shot of across the floor. I mean, I'm seeing a color story. I'm seeing depth of stock, and this seems very appealing to me. 28 Shop is pretty quintessential brand or identity for Marshall Field in general, as far as women's wear, women's clothing, and high-end fashion. It's moved around a couple times, and it's probably not exactly what it was, but still exists as a thread from the past. They've got a placard on the way into the room designated as the 28 Shop, which has a picture of the original room. I do remember the original 28 Shop as I remember it, and it was all gray, draped. I think it was on 6 or 7. Now it's on 3, and you kind of walked in. It was always in that. It was always in that older part of the building that you kind of had to dip into. You had to kind of go down a ramp into the 28 Shop, and it had that hushed kind of quiet elegance, and it was pretty sparse. I think just mannequins, and you had to ask for apparel. And as I remember, even when I was there, they had, of course, we had Valentino and Christian Lacroix and really high-end designers, which I don't think Macy's currently has, but they had some pretty good looks. And the shop was very appealing. It's pretty much just gowns and evening wear, but it was, a glamorous, dramatic presentation, which made you feel like you were having an experience, even if it wasn't exactly the 28 Shop as people remember it. Blush, again, we're not following fashion trends, but apparently it is a fashion trend, and it made for a very nice presentation. And as I was just wandering through the store, I just happened in to the store last Saturday. I was impressed by, again, the depth of stock, and some of these pieces were really high quality, lovely pieces of merchandise. And of course, in the middle of the 28 Shop, I ran into Chip, Albert Henderson, who's the one of the visual people at State Street. He was working on a Saturday getting ready for this big visit, and I insisted on snapping a picture of him. And I actually got a salesperson by the name of Rachel, who was kind enough to snap our picture of Chip and I in the middle of the 28 Shop. Don't tell anyone that I was taking Chip away from his work. Chip encouraged me to continue looking through the store, and of course I did. This was a nice display I noticed on one of the landings looking into the South State Street room. Pretty, it's just very pretty, very appealing. Chip has especially encouraged me to visit the shoe salon, and a lot of new fixturing has been brought in, a lot of new layering of product to really elevate the shoe department. And as I continued to walk through the store, I saw different variations of this blue sky theme. Again, this makes for a very appealing shopping experience inside the store. I think this was just generally sportswear. And another view of sportswear display at Macy's. And this was kind of fun display. I think they're still working on this, but I snapped a picture anyway because I thought it was, it was a dynamic foil to the display. These stair steps, just painted this bright blue. It's very appealing. I escalated to the furniture floor, which I think is on 6. Of course, it used to be on 8, but they've eliminated some of the floors to make the store more cost effective. I do remember furniture department always being a very special experience at the Marshall Field store. Of course, they had the trend house, and they had a lot of antiques. I remember whenever I was having a rough day at the office, I would just wander over to Marshall Field and take a tour of the furniture floor just to calm my nerves. It also had kind of that very subdued lighting and the hushed elegance about it, and the plushy blue gray carpet of the antique room, or just taking a tour of the trend house. But again, this is very appealing, very fresh, very approachable furniture floor, looking into what's left of the 90s atrium renovation. And as I got off the escalator on the furniture floor, I was greeted by this Henderdon dining room set again, which that's a blast from the past. I do remember Henderdon and Baker as being brands of absolutely stunning, unparalleled quality. And I was glad to see some of those names. This was a lovely display with all the blue and white porcelain and this giant chandelier in your face. This was a fun little display in the furniture department where they had 750 square foot example of apartment living here in Chicago. And I think around the corner they had 950. And I thought later on, I thought, okay, well, this is the modern day version of the trend house. It's maybe not a trend house designed by David Hockney, but it's approachable example of how you might live as a young person in Chicago. Of course, Macy's on State also has tabletop. It was moved from one of the upper floors to the lower level, which sounds kind of down market, but they've done a beautiful job on the lower level to create a very nice tabletop experience with the crystal and china and flatware, as well as bedding and giftwares. This is the tabletop display in the lower level area. And bedding, again, I wasn't really focusing on this blush color, but did see a lot of blush. Beautiful sheet sets and towels and robes in the lower level. Also in the lower level, they have the book department. And this was kind of an interesting vintage historic shot of Field's hat department, which is way before my time. But it was a fun little blast from the past in the book department. And then looking down this aisle of the book department, you see this beautiful shot of the Marshall Field clock and the American flags, and actually Marina City in the background for those of us neighbors who are living across the river in Marina City. And this, every so often there's these really unchanged moments in the store. This is the cut through to the subway from the lower level. They've made something out of nothing by putting this this actually the same photo, but just in black and white of the clock on the way to the subway. And it has, again, it's just this clean, elegant amenity for people heading toward the subway. Again, glimpses of the original store, the store we might remember from our youth or childhood, the gleaming stainless steel escalator surrounds. The escalators were put in, I believe, in the 30s in the store. Some of them have been removed for various reasons, but a lot of them remain, and a lot of the surrounds are really unchanged. So you have these moments where you find yourself back in time just by some of the materials that you come in contact with. This is in the lower level, and you can see some of this stainless steel metalwork, which is essentially unchanged in time. This is on the 7th floor, this bank of elevators. And I love this because essentially it's another unchanged moment in history. Then and now, still now. This is on the 7th floor, just outside the Narcissus Room, which was originally open to the public restaurant, kind of for the overflow of the Walnut Room and all the other food options on 7. Then it was made into the employee cafeteria. I think maybe maybe during the 90s renovation and long before they sold off the top floors. But a lovely little space with these a row of 3 crystal chandeliers outside. If you zoom in here, you can see the fountain in the Narcissus Room. The Narcissus Room looks like it's pretty much closed up, maybe for special events or overflow activities. But I was able to sneak this picture through the crack in some of the I guess the window fogging, and you can see the fountain in the Narcissus Room. Also on the 7th floor, of course, is the Walnut Room, which many people are familiar with. And there was an event going on there the day that I was there. It's a big fountain in the middle of the room, covered in the spring flower theme. This, of course, is where the tree is placed every holiday season to create a festive scene. And the day I was at the store, the Walnut Room was really hopping. They had some sort of big presentation going on for this festive crowd. Also on 7, they have a history display, which has been there for quite some time, but it seemed like it's been refreshed to me. I don't remember it being quite as engaging. This is a nod to the Norman Rockwell illustration of the Marshall Field clock on State Street, kind of lovingly reenacted here. I didn't make a point of going through all the different archive materials, but here I think is a exhibit about the tree, the great tree that's hoisted, or was traditionally hoisted into the Walnut Room for many years until it was replaced by an artificial version. Of course, the Walnut Room atrium was cut down again long before my time to, I think, just 2.5 floors. It was originally went up to the top of the building, and I I do in the lore, I do remember hearing somewhere about a second Tiffany dome, but I've never seen a photograph of it, and I've never seen any documentation of a second Tiffany dome over the what would be the continuation of the South State Street atrium above the first floor Tiffany Dome. But these are pictures of, a real life tree being hoisted into the room. And as I remember from my time at Marshall Field, they told us that people who remember that, they said that the tree would be brought in from Randolph on the first floor and then taken down the main aisle. And then I guess it was hoisted up. It doesn't even make any sense to me. I guess it was hoisted up the North State atrium in that empty space and then brought down the main aisle on 7 into the walnut room. Sounds like a lot of work. And this was an interesting item to me because I did wonder what happened to this. This used to be on the first floor in the South State Street room, and it's a memorial of all the people who, I believe, employees of Marshall Field who died in the war. I do remember being in the store on Veterans Day, and they would announce, a moment of silence every Veterans Day to remember all the people who sacrificed their life to make America the greatest nation on the earth. More exhibits on the seventh floor archive area, and these are pictures of trees in different periods, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, with these display cases with some of the ornaments from those trees. And I didn't have enough time to really study this, but it was especially charming. I did look at a couple, and I do remember, I believe her name was Sally Paulson, who and her team who spent a good part of the year making these ornaments by hand for this tree every year. And some of those ornaments are still in these cases. This was a shout out to Victor Skrybneski and a number of advertisements he produced for the store. I didn't. I'm not going to show one today because all the pictures I took are my pictures that I took last week. So I wanted everything to be um, my experience. But you can look up Victor Skrybneski uh, advertisements, photographs for Marshall Field, and they are stunning. Some of them are on display here. The taking a picture of the picture was not the best reproduction, so I didn't include them here. But those of you who are familiar with Chicago and fashion and photography and art will, of course, remember Victor Skrybneski. Later in his life, he redesigned the garden at the Water Tower Monument on Michigan Avenue, which was later revised, but it was a lovely garden that he designed, and it was enjoyed for many, many years. It's now the Jane Byrne Park. Also on 7, some vintage merchandise on display, which I've never seen before, hats and shoes. And this was interesting. This is the drawing. And I do remember this when they launched the renovation. Phil Miller. I do remember Phil Miller. I do remember this drawing. I don't know if I remember the model, but there is a model for anyone who doesn't remember. The third atrium they created in the center of the store where previously all the fire escapes had been. Originally, the store was basically two sides, the State Street side and the Wabash side, and then there were bridges on the upper levels that went across with two big cores of fire escapes. On the first floor, of course, you had to cross over. I remember as a child having to cross over to the other side of the store. You'd be shopping on State Street, and the next thing you know, you'd have to be cutting through the alley to get into the other side of the building. And that was all changed in the 90s when they joined the two sides and created, I think it was Amy Meadows that called them the killer stairs that came. They created new fire stairs in the interior of the space on the exterior walls of the building so they could close in the core of the building to create this big atrium space. And it was, I mean, I think it must have been in there for 20 years. It was quite the gathering place for shoppers. And again, glimpses of what was as you traverse the building. The central elevator escalator core is still a portion, a remnant of that recreated atrium space. And you can see the Marshall Field green, which they maintained. You can kind of see this postmodern 80s grill work, which still remains. And yeah, it's really what's old is new is still there. And again, the Marshall Field green remains. There's some green marble that's part of that renovation, which is on the first floor. That still remains. And then this grill work very Marshall Field-like looking. And then these little cutouts and this little kind of neoclassical and fake stonework, which is in that drawing. Kind of, Marshall Field had they were going for a very elegant, little elegant swagger. And some of those elements continue to be visible. Again, just traversing the space in the store, it's charming. I mean, this is so traditional and so historic, and that's all still preserved, still respected, still there to be experienced, along with all the improvements over the years. Again, the lighting and the cleanliness and the gleaming, literally gleaming quality of the store. These crystal chandeliers were added to the middle state room. I guess about 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, when the Water Tower Marshall Field's or Macy's store closed, chandeliers were repurposed here on State Street. Chip and his team and Melania have created a number of spring store windows to go with the theme. This surreal garden on Randolph Street, pairing kind of a Dr. Seuss looking shrubbery with the blue sky and the crazy zany colors of the season, just taking us somewhere we all want to be. I can't encourage you enough to visit the State Street Macy's store this season. It is looking better than it ever has. I mean, I worked there quite some time ago, and I've um, kept abreast of what goes on in the store for quite some time. And I have to say, I've never seen it looking so fresh, so clean, so inviting. If you're coming downtown this season, be sure to visit the Art Institute, the Bean, and Macy's on State. I think they're the big three attractions this season. If you see me there, be sure to flag me down, and I'll be happy to take a picture with you and meet you under the clock. And I hope you find what you need, and whatever your plans are, I hope they bring you to Macy's on State this season.